Hey, how's it going? There's recently been a bit of a confrontation with some military muscle flexing going on between China and Japan. Most of the military muscle flexing has been taking place from China. And there is some concern because I believe that there is natural gas sources that are known to be at or suspected to be at these islands, which lie actually between Japan and Taiwan, which China also claims. And people are concerned about what China is going to do. What's the next step? If they move in and try to take the islands, which Japan claims, what is Japan's response? Well, Japan doesn't really have much of a military that can launch an offensive war anymore. So it would come down to the United States. Would the United States be willing to fight Japan, fight China on Japan's behalf? Well, let's look a little bit of Chinese history here. Now, China is not known for using military force just as a display. All right. There are different times where China will use its military forces. One, if it's attacked. Two, if it fears it is about to be attacked, such as the case of the Korean War, where the United States, the UN, had all but defeated the North Korean military who had previously invaded South Korea. And we were right there at the Yalu River. And we had General Douglas MacArthur talking about using atomic bombs on China. Well, China was not about to wait for U.S. bombers to fly overhead and start dropping bombs in their cities, so they attacked first. Another time, though, that China will use its military force is in order to assert its sovereignty over a given area. They had done it in Tibet, and they have attempted to do it with Taiwan. Now, the end result of the Tibet incursion is obvious. They own Tibet. Okay. Another military engagement that China got into was against India. There's apparently disputed territory between those two countries, and China asserted itself, led to a war between India and China. Taiwan, they have not been able to attack the island, directly. They will occasionally lob missiles or cannon fire in that direction, but they have not yet invaded. Now, Taiwan's military is really kick-ass military. They would give the Chinese a bloody nose, but in the end, China would win and Taiwan would lose unless the United States intervened. So there is a possibility that China would use its military force in order to exert itself against Japan and the United States. One thing, the United States owes a lot of money to China, and China's economy, on the other hand, is very dependent upon its exports to the United States, as well as to the rest of the world. So, is a military conflict likely between China and the United States? The answer is probably not. Okay, we're not talking about Mao Zedong. We're not talking about his perpetual revolution stuff. We're talking about China as a sovereign country feels that they have the right to assert themselves, to lay claim to territory that they have always considered theirs. And what this will likely lead to is a staring match between China on one hand and the United States on the other. Now, one thing that China knows, and we all know, is that war costs money. And China's current political leadership is more inclined to making money rather than spending it. They will only spend money if they think that there's more money to be made later, For example, I'll spend $100 if I can make $200 later. Okay, so the actual chances of China getting into a military conflict against the United States and Japan is actually very low. What I think China wants to do is to say, that's ours. All right, this is ours. It's historically ours, whether or not they can prove it or not. It's historically ours, and so we're laying claim. And this staring match will, they think, most likely, I'm just guessing right now, what China, I think, believes is that the United States is not going to go to war with these little islands. Neither will Japan. These islands, even if they do contain natural gas reserves, which China needs to fuel its economy, they are not about to risk an all-out military conflict, or even a low-level military conflict with anyone. Because if China and Japan go at it, who's to say whether or not North Korea might decide to pile on and lob a few missiles at Japan just for the hell of it? And then you've got a real problem on your hands. Because North Korea, they do have the missile technology to hit Japan with, missiles, and that could lead to U.S. retaliation, in which case the Second Korean War will start up. And who knows what China will do in that event. What I think is most likely going to happen is that China will make more of its presence known around these islands. And the United States will respond in kind, flexing a little bit of American muscle over there too. And neither side can really go to war with the other without doing serious economic harm to itself. Whatever gain either side might get out of retaining the islands and defeating the other side will be offset by the sheer cost of the war. Now, China needs us as much as we need them. They know that. We know that. Japan knows it. But what is probably going to happen is China and Japan and the United States, and probably some fourth country trying to act as some sort of intermediary, perhaps Russia, might decide to, all right, we will explore the islands for their natural gas reserves, and then we will work out some sort of split. The amount of money raised, amount of money earned, the profits from the natural gas reserves that are extracted, we will settle on, for example, a 50-50 split. Okay, Japan gets half, China gets the other half, or China gets 75% and Japan gets 25%. And this, of course, will be a benefit to both sides. And we can both go home and say, all right, that was close. And China will get its big infusion of patriotism, and all the Chinese will march in streets saying China is victorious, etc., and so forth. And the United States can take comfort in the fact we do not again involve ourselves in another conflict, because the Iraq and Afghanistan conflict, which are relatively small by comparison to any potential conflict with China, really did financially ruin this country. Literally, we cannot afford to go to war with China. Shit, even our American flags are made in that country. We run out of flags in a war with China, all right? Now understand, all right, China has a long history of being exploited by foreign powers, including Japan, and also to a certain extent the United States. Much of their victimization by foreign powers was at the hands of the British, which is how the British got their hands on Hong Kong in the first place. So China is like, we've been everybody's punching bag for a really long time, and we're not going to be anyone's punching bag anymore. So if you want to mix it up with us, we will certainly mix it up with you. So this is China's stepping out into the world, saying we're nobody's victim anymore. And they have been very active in terms of expanding their reach economically, not only into the United States, but also into Africa. They made serious inroads diplomatically in Africa. They have set up businesses in Africa. So they have an eye for their own economic well-being. because Africa is resource rich, and there's a lot of cheap labor to be had in Africa, as well as, of course, within the Chinese population, which is what actually China does. They send their workers to Africa to work. They don't usually employ the native Africans. So China is really all about more so making money than spending it. So what they're going to try to do is going to try to find a way that they can negotiate their way out of this, and then leave this whole thing without looking like you're scared. Because what this confrontation does is it brings the issue up so that you cannot avoid it anymore. Someone's going to have to sit down at the table somewhere and talk to somebody about this. Because now that the issue has been brought up, it cannot be dropped. They cannot put this off anymore. So I don't know the history of whether or not China and Japan have had some diplomatic back and forth of this issue. That's our islands. No, that's our islands. But now it is unavoidable. Somebody has to sit down and talk about it. And the only way out is a negotiated peace. Because economically speaking, it would ruin both countries. It would ruin the United States, it would ruin Japan, and it would ruin China. None of the three countries involved would come out better for it. And I hope that's what happens. All right, you guys take care.